Is Darfur facing a new genocide? Almost 2 decades ago, this Sudanese province was at the centre of global attention as a campaign of mass murder became one of the worst humanitarian crises of the new millennium. However, at long last, the region appeared to have found a degree of peace. Until now. With Sudan once again marred in civil war, death and destruction have returned to this remote and impoverished area. All this was highlighted in October 2025 with reports of mass killings as rebel forces seized a key city. So, why did Darfur become the site of such devastating violence before, and why is it again returning to conflict? Hello and welcome. My name is James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict and security. Genocide stands as the ultimate violation of humanity's most fundamental belief in the equal worth and dignity of every human life. It amounts to the willful destruction of an ethnic, linguistic or religious community merely for who they are. But while the crime of genocide has been recognised for almost 80 years, all too often it goes unchecked. After the Holocaust, the world vowed never again. And yet we've seen how quickly that commitment has faded. One of the first genocides of the 21st century took place in Darfur. At the time, it became a global cause, with international personalities lining up to draw attention to the slaughter taking place in this remote African region. However, while it's long since faded from public attention to be replaced by the killing in Ukraine and Gaza, the area is once again the epicentre of a brutal campaign of mass murder, violence and destruction. But this time, it's getting little attention. Darfur, literally meaning the land or home of the Fur, a local tribe, lies in the far west of the Republic of Sudan. Chad lies to its west, the Central African Republic to its southwest, South Sudan to its south, and Libya to its northwest. Part of the Sahel belt, which stretches across northern Africa, the region is an arid and semi-arid savanna that's increasingly at risk of drought and desertification. Unlike the rest of Sudan, which is predominantly Arab, Darfur has historically been far more diverse. For centuries, it supported both African farming communities such as the Fur, the Masalit and the Zaghawa, as well as nomadic Arab tribes who moved their livestock across the region's grazing lands. However, despite their ethnic and other differences, until relatively recently, these groups have coexisted in a delicate balance, governed by local institutions and customary land rights. Darfur has a long and rich history. Having been settled for thousands of years, it existed as an independent sultanate until it was annexed by the Anglo-Egyptian administration that was then ruling Sudan. Having been isolated and underdeveloped under colonial rule, this marginalisation and neglect continued after Sudan gained its independence in 1956. In addition to having little to no infrastructure, the region had few schools or hospitals. It also had limited political influence. Meanwhile, the decades-long conflict between the Arab-Muslim north of Sudan and the predominantly Christian Black African south further added to its neglect. As a result, while Khartoum and the Nile Valley in the centre and east of the country became increasingly developed, Darfur remained largely ignored. By the 1980s, the situation was steadily worsening, as Darfur was severely affected by droughts and famines, pushing the desert southwards. Competition for arable land and water intensified, leading to tensions between the African farming groups and the Arab pastoralists. As a result, the Sudanese government, under the country's military dictator, Omar al-Bashir, who came to power in 1989, began arming certain Arab tribes. By the early 2000s, Darfur was at breaking point. As several black African rebel groups emerged to fight against the central government's neglect and Arab domination, Khartoum responded by escalating the situation. Instead of addressing the grievances of the rebels, it stepped up its support for local Arab militias, known as the Janjaweed. This would spark one of the worst humanitarian crises of the new millennium. Between 2003 and 2008, an estimated 300,000 people were killed and more than 2.5 million were displaced by state-sanctioned violence that saw entire villages destroyed in a campaign that both the United Nations and the United States would openly call genocide. But despite the global outrage, international intervention was limited. Although a joint United Nations African Union peacekeeping mission, UNAMID, was eventually established, it was underfunded, overstretched and frequently obstructed by Khartoum. But while the violence had decreased by the mid-2010s and UNAMID withdrew in 2021, the region remained deeply scarred. And today it stands on the brink of a new crisis. I hope you're finding this helpful. If so, please do give it a like and perhaps consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks so much. And now back to the video. So, what's caused this new threat? The answer lies in Sudan's current civil war. In 2019, Omar al-Bashir was finally overthrown after 3 decades in power. But while there were hopes that the country would return to civilian democracy, it instead fell back under military rule, with power shared by 2 key figures. On the one hand, there was the head of the Sudanese army, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. At his side was Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hemedti, the commander of the so-called Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, which had emerged from the dreaded Janjaweed. But while relations initially appeared to be good between the 2 men, tensions steadily grew, and in April 2023, fighting broke out, plunging Sudan into a new war. But while the focus of the conflict has been centred on the capital Khartoum and surrounding regions, it's also had a disastrous effect on Darfur. The RSF's roots in Darfur's Arab tribes, coupled with Dagalo's control over local gold mines, have since seen a renewed campaign of ethnic cleansing against non-Arab groups. Significant atrocities have already been reported in West Darfur, where there have been reports that entire communities have been wiped out in what many are now calling a second Darfur genocide. This was highlighted in October 2025 when RSF forces seized the capital of North Darfur, Fasher, and reports quickly emerged of mass atrocities involving summary executions. Meanwhile, all this has led to a broader humanitarian crisis. Aside from those killed in the escalating violence, entire communities have been displaced, often multiple times. As a result, thousands of families now live in makeshift camps with no food or water. To add to all this, communications have been largely cut off, and the UN is now warning of a new famine. So, how did all this happen again? At one level, Darfur's renewed violence is a natural consequence of the broader civil war taking place in Sudan. However, it runs far deeper than this. The transitional government that emerged after Bashir never truly consolidated its control over outlying areas such as Darfur. Instead, power remained in the hands of the RSF. And when the civil war broke out, the RSF, fearing local rebellions, returned to murder to consolidate its control over this vital region. In this sense, Darfur graphically highlights how entrenched state weakness, a history of ethnic discrimination and external neglect can have profound consequences. However, the grim irony is that in the current global context, the international community should be paying far more attention to Darfur than ever before. Apart from the devastating effects on the people of the province, the crisis is already having a broader regional impact. Darfur's proximity to Chad and the Central African Republic means that violence easily spills across borders. At the same time, refugees have fled westwards in their hundreds of thousands, while weapons and fighters flow back the other way. Chad's government, already dealing with its own instability, faces enormous strain hosting refugees and managing cross-border clashes. Meanwhile, armed groups in Libya and the Central African Republic have exploited the chaos to expand their smuggling and recruitment networks. And on top of all this, Sudan's internal conflict has also become a proxy battlefield for external powers. While Egypt supports the army, fearing the disintegration of its southern neighbour, the United Arab Emirates is accused of backing the RSF. In this sense, the renewed conflict in Darfur isn't just a localised crisis. It has very real regional and global implications. But while Darfur was front-page news in the mid-2000s and celebrities lined up to campaign for international intervention, today the region is largely forgotten. And yet, if there was ever a time to pay attention to Darfur, and indeed to Sudan as a whole, it's right now. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.